Warning, this video contains footage from Halloween Horror Nights, a horror event at Universal Studios Orlando. It contains footage that some may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. It seems that, nowadays, every piece of horror media has its own take on classic legends. From Yetis to werewolves, it seems that every group has their own take on creatures of the night. One of the most common ones is the vampire. From the buck-toothed Nosferatu to the leech-tongued bloodsuckers of the Magnus Archives, vampires are probably one of the most versatile creatures in all of horror history. Of course, Halloween Horror Nights has added to this trend, with several types of vampires appearing throughout the years. So, let's talk Halloween Horror Nights' portrayal of vampires. The story of Horror Nights' vampires starts long before the event began. In 1931, Universal Studios released Dracula, a motion picture inspired by Bram Stoker's novel, as well as the stylistic horror of the movie Nosferatu. Dracula was very well received and is considered the start of the golden age of horror, a time period where the use of sound revolutionized horror movies. The success and importance of Dracula would earn the film the status of a classic, and in 1991, Universal would use the vampire to promote the newly planned Fright Nights, the event that would later become Halloween Horror Nights. Now that we know how vampires ended up in the Horror Nights story, let's start talking about Universal's unique takes on them. Our first group of vampires in Halloween Horror Nights lore begins in 1955. This is when we are first introduced to a group of vampires led by Olato. Olato is described as one of the oldest and most powerful vampires in all of Halloween Horror Nights' lore, and that he leads a rogue horde of vampires, leading them across the United States looking for suitable places to feed. They find us in the form of Hollywood High School's homecoming parade. Disguised as a group of greasers, the vampires infiltrated the parade. It quickly becomes a bloodbath and one of 3 major vampire attacks in Horror Nights history. In between attacks, the group welcomes Irlo Wolf, a man who claims to have been turned into a vampire during an attack on his circus in 1938. However, Wolf is actually Dr. Oddfellow, a sinister ringleader who is searching for immortal souls to claim to fuel his own immortal power. During a meeting with Olato, Wolf manages to gain influence over the vampires, leading to the next notable attack. This time, Music Fest 69, an event taking place in upstate New York, is attacked. The vampires feed freely, and in the chaos, no one notices the disappearance of both Irlo Wolf and Olato. It is implied that Oddfellow sacrificed Olato to gain more influence over the vampires. The final time we hear of Olato's vampires is on New Year's Eve 1984. Once again, the vampires feast on the living, completely overrunning Times Square. Vamp 85 also showed us just how many vampires left among the living, as there were several turned celebrities among the rings. This is the last time we hear of this particular group of vampires, but this is not the only group that Halloween Horror Nights has to offer. Our next group is introduced in the 2004 house Castle Vampire. These vampires would gather every 13 years to lure victims to their castle to feed on their blood. They would do this to renew vows to a dark power that fueled both their bloodlust but also their immortality. 13 years later, the vampires would host the Blood Masquerade, once again celebrating the renewal of vows to the dark power they served. After this, the vampires decided to break tradition, expanding their territory to a nightclub. While the themes of renewing vows vanished, the idea of luring people remained. This time, vampires luring passers-by with drugs, sex, and rock and roll, before capturing and killing them. Now would be a good time to point out that Olato's vampires and the vampire group are implied to get along well, as a short story published by Universal had a vampire from Olato's group gain information about Oddfellow from a vampire who worked at Club Vampire. Our final group takes us to 19 Hemingway Lane in Cary, Ohio. These vampires are more animal than man. While they are still able to turn people, they are far more focused on feeding on blood than using methods such as seduction or manipulation to gain the favor of humans. Their appearance reflects that too, as they more resemble Nosferatu than Dracula. Their oversized ears are not for show, and the short story The Hive explains how they listen for heartbeats in order to track their prey. They also burrow, which is a trait not seen in any other Horror Nights vampires. We don't have a lot of information on the Hive, which is unfortunate, considering how interesting the concept is. But overall, Horror Nights has some very interesting takes on vampires, and I cannot wait to see how they develop them in the future. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. And remember, I'm always down to talk theme parks. Bye now!